AITA. I went to a group lunch and my total was $18 and was asked to pay $40. I only paid $18. I recently received a last-minute invitation to an acquaintance's birthday lunch. It wasn't someone I knew well, but I figured, why not? It seemed like a good opportunity to socialize a bit and catch up with a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces. The lunch was set at a trendy restaurant, and when I arrived, I quickly realized the group was much larger than I'd anticipated. There were 18 of us crammed around 2 long tables. The vibe was lively, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. I kept things pretty simple. I ordered a small entree and a soda, which totaled about $14 before tax and tip. I'm in the habit of being mindful about my spending at group outings like this. After all, I've been in enough situations where splitting bills at large gatherings doesn't always work out fairly. When the check arrived, I already had my phone ready to calculate my total and Venmo my share, $14, plus tax and a 22% tip automatically added for large groups. That brought my portion to $18, all said and done. But then, as the check hit the table, things took an unexpected turn. One person, someone sitting at the far end of the table who I barely knew, grabbed the check and loudly announced, "Let's just split it evenly." There wasn't much room for discussion, and no one really objected at the moment. I thought about speaking up, but I hesitated. It all happened so fast. The waiter had even said he could process up to 6 cards, and it would have been perfectly manageable to divide the bill among smaller groups. On top of that, there were natural divisions in the group. Some people clearly came in pairs and shared dishes, while others had ordered individually like I did. It could have been simple. But no, apparently, that wasn't the plan. The acquaintance-turned-host who'd claimed responsibility for handling the bill made it clear she wasn't interested in the hassle of calculations. Instead, she determined that we would all Venmo her $40 each to cover the total. $40. I was stunned. I mean, $40 per person. For lunch. I knew what I had ordered, and there was no way my small entree and soda added up to anywhere near that amount. I glanced around the table, particularly at the group on my side. Most of them seemed to have ordered similarly modest meals, salads, sandwiches, a few appetizers. There was no way their totals were anywhere close to $40 either. But then I thought about the other end of the table. That was where the drinks were flowing freely. Cocktails, glasses of wine, maybe even a bottle or two being shared. People on that side were ordering entrees and desserts, and it was clear their spending was on another level. If I had to guess, their end of the table had racked up a bill significantly higher than ours. I felt the frustration building. It wasn't just about the money, it was the principle of the thing. Splitting the bill evenly wasn't even a common practice in the state I live in. Typically, people pay for what they ordered, and large groups figure it out without sticking anyone with an unfair share. That's just how it's done here. So, to see this person not only ignore that but to ask everyone to overpay so she could avoid the effort of basic math? It didn't sit right with me. I considered my options. Normally, I'm the kind of person who will just suck it up and pay more than I owe in situations like this. I tell myself, it's the cost of socializing, or, it's just a little extra money, let it go. But this time felt different. This wasn't the first time I'd been in a situation where splitting a bill evenly meant being taken advantage of. It's a pattern I've noticed, and it's always people like me, those who order modestly and try to be mindful, who end up paying for the excesses of others. I didn't want to keep letting it happen. So, after thinking it through, I made a decision. I Venmo'd her $18, the amount I actually owed, including tax and tip. I figured if she reached out to me, I would explain. I'd tell her exactly what I ordered, show her the math, and offer to pay the difference if she could prove I owed more. But I also planned to make it clear that the situation wasn't fair. Why should I overpay by $22 to subsidize someone else's cocktails and desserts? If one of us had to lose out, why should it always be me? I knew there was a chance this could create some tension, but I felt justified in my choice. I wasn't the one who decided to handle the bill in such a careless way, and I wasn't the one who asked people to overpay. That was her call, not mine. If she didn't want to deal with the hassle, fine, but she shouldn't expect everyone else to shoulder the cost of her convenience. So far, I haven't heard back from her. Maybe she didn't notice, or maybe she's choosing not to address it. Either way, I'm not sorry. I'm tired of being the person who quietly overpays to keep the peace. This time, I stood my ground, and honestly, it feels kind of empowering. But I can't help wondering, was I wrong for doing this? Should I have just sucked it up and paid the $40, even if it felt unfair? I'm curious to hear what others think. Update 1. A few days after the lunch, I was going about my day when my phone buzzed with a Venmo notification. At first, I thought it was someone paying me back for something or maybe a random payment request for a small favor I'd forgotten. But when I opened the app, I saw a $22 request from none other than Sarah, the person who had taken charge of the bill at the birthday lunch. No message, no explanation, just a request. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a mix of annoyance and amusement. She hadn't even bothered to ask why I'd only sent $18 or tried to clarify the situation. Instead, she had just sent the request, expecting me to cough up the rest without question. It was a bold move, to say the least, but I wasn't going to let it slide without addressing it. I took a breath and decided to message her directly. I figured a polite, clear explanation would help smooth things over. I explained that I had only paid for what I ordered because I didn't think it was fair to split the bill evenly when some people had obviously ordered far more than others. I laid out the math, detailing exactly what I'd had, a $14 meal, the tax, and the 22% tip. I kept my tone civil, even friendly, because I wanted to avoid unnecessary drama. To my surprise, Sarah responded almost immediately. But her tone was far from friendly. Her message came across as condescending and hostile. She accused me of being cheap and claimed I had ruined the vibe of the lunch by not going along with the even split. According to her, it wasn't about the money, it was about doing what's expected in a group setting and maintaining harmony. She went on about how splitting the bill evenly was the norm for situations like this and implied that I was out of line for not going along with it. Her response hit a nerve. I had expected some pushback, sure, but the level of hostility she threw at me was unnecessary. I took my time before replying, choosing my words carefully. I told her that while I understood her perspective, I believed fairness was more important than blind conformity to some unwritten rule. I reiterated that people who ordered modestly shouldn't be expected to subsidize those who went all out, especially when the waiter had explicitly said we could split the bill in smaller groups. That's when Sarah dropped a bombshell that completely changed my perspective on the entire situation. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the birthday person, the person whose lunch this supposedly was, didn't even know everyone at the table. Sarah had invited several people, including me, without consulting the birthday person. She had essentially padded the guest list, and in doing so, had added to the chaos and inflated the bill. I was stunned. Up until that moment, I had operated under the assumption that I'd been invited because the birthday celebrant actually wanted me there. I thought my presence at the lunch was intentional, not the result of Sarah deciding to pack the table with extra bodies for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. This revelation changed everything. Not only had I been overcharged for a meal I barely ate, but now I realized I wasn't even supposed to be there in the first place. The more I thought about it, the more absurd the whole situation seemed. Sarah had taken it upon herself to invite people without the birthday person's knowledge or consent. She had then decided to handle the bill in the laziest way possible, expecting everyone to split it evenly regardless of what they ordered. And when someone dared to push back, she had the audacity to call them cheap and accuse them of ruining the vibe. If anyone had ruined the vibe, it was her, with her poor planning and lack of consideration for both the birthday person and the guests. I felt compelled to make things right with the person whose birthday it actually was. I reached out to them privately, apologizing for attending without realizing I hadn't been invited directly. I explained that I had assumed Sarah was organizing the lunch on their behalf and hadn't meant to impose. To my relief, they were incredibly gracious. They told me they'd been confused about the large turnout but had assumed Sarah had handled everything. They thanked me for reaching out and assured me there were no hard feelings. The fact that Sarah had unilaterally decided to invite extra people, mishandled the bill, and then tried to guilt-trip me into overpaying felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the principle. Why should I have to subsidize a party I wasn't even truly invited to? Why should I let someone like Sarah dictate the rules when she clearly didn't have anyone else's best interests at heart? Update 2. A week after the chaotic lunch debacle, life had mostly returned to normal, and I had almost managed to stop thinking about the whole situation. That is, until I bumped into Lisa, one of the other guests from the lunch, at a local coffee shop. We weren't particularly close, but we exchanged the usual pleasantries, and before long, our conversation naturally veered toward the infamous lunch. I hadn't planned to bring it up, but something about Lisa's friendly demeanor made me feel like venting. I told her about the Venmo request Sarah had sent me, my decision to only pay what I owed, and the backlash I received from Sarah in return. As I finished my story, Lisa's expression shifted. She gave me a knowing look, the kind that immediately told me she had some information I wasn't privy to. "Oh, you didn't hear," she said, lowering her voice slightly. My curiosity was piqued, and I leaned in as she began to explain. Apparently, Sarah's behavior at the lunch had been even more underhanded than I'd realized. Lisa revealed that Sarah hadn't just taken charge of the bill out of convenience or laziness, she had done it for personal gain. Lisa had overheard Sarah whispering to someone at the other end of the table about adding a little extra for the effort. Sarah had padded the total to ensure that she wouldn't have to pay a cent for her own meal, or, based on how much alcohol had been ordered at her end of the table, her drinks. Essentially, Sarah had used the opportunity to scam the group, relying on social norms and peer pressure to pocket her convenience fee. Hearing this was like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Suddenly, her insistence on splitting the bill evenly, her refusal to let the waiter divide it properly, and her dismissive attitude all made perfect sense. She hadn't been trying to make things easier for the group, she had been manipulating the situation to benefit herself. My initial annoyance turned to full-blown anger as I realized the extent of her audacity. Not only had she forced us to subsidize the people who ordered the most expensive items, but she had also ensured that we were covering her entire bill under the guise of convenience. Lisa admitted she had been suspicious at the time but hadn't wanted to cause a scene at the lunch. She'd paid the $40 without questioning it, even though she knew her own meal hadn't come anywhere close to that amount. Hearing my story about Sarah's Venmo request only confirmed what Lisa had suspected all along. Sarah wasn't just careless, she was calculating. After Lisa left, I sat at the coffee shop for a while, replaying the events of the lunch in my head. The way Sarah had taken control of the bills so quickly, the lack of discussion, her hostile response to my decision to only pay my share, it all pointed to someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I felt foolish for not realizing it sooner, but more than that, I felt a growing sense of responsibility. If Sarah had scammed me and Lisa, there was no doubt in my mind that she had done the same to the rest of the group. When I got home, I debated my next move. Part of me wanted to let it go, after all, it was only $22. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about principle. Sarah had manipulated and taken advantage of everyone at that lunch, and she was counting on the fact that most people wouldn't question her. I couldn't let her get away with it. I decided to send a message to the group chat that Sarah had created for the lunch. I kept my tone polite but firm. I explained what I had learned, laying out the facts without naming names. I described how Sarah had insisted on splitting the bill evenly, despite it being unnecessary, and mentioned that I had since learned there was an extra, convenience fee added to the total that no one had been informed about. I made it clear that I wasn't accusing anyone directly, but I thought the group deserved to know so they could make their own decisions about how to proceed. The response was immediate. My phone started buzzing with notifications as messages poured in from the other guests. Several people said they had felt uneasy about the way the bill was handled but hadn't wanted to speak up. Others admitted they had been suspicious of Sarah's motives but didn't have any concrete proof at the time. A few people even shared similar stories about Sarah from past events, where she had a habit of conveniently taking charge of group expenses in ways that always seemed to benefit her. What surprised me most was how many people had overpaid significantly. One guest, who had only ordered a $12 appetizer and water, said they'd felt pressured into paying the full $40 because they didn't want to cause drama. Another couple revealed they had paid $80 between them, even though they'd shared a single entree and a dessert. The more people shared, the clearer it became that Sarah's scheme had cost the group hundreds of dollars collectively. The tipping point came when someone asked Sarah directly in the group chat to clarify the exact total of the bill and how she had calculated the $40 per person. Sarah, who had been quiet up until that point, finally responded, but her answer was vague and defensive. She claimed she didn't remember the exact amount and accused the group of blowing things out of proportion. When pressed further, she left the chat entirely. That was the moment the tide fully turned. Several people demanded refunds, and a few even said they were considering reporting her behavior to the app for fraudulent activity. I couldn't help but feel vindicated. What had started as an infuriating but relatively small incident had turned into a moment of accountability for someone who had clearly been taking advantage of people for far too long. Update 3. 2 weeks later I was at the market. The market was bustling with activity, fresh produce stands, vendors selling handmade goods, and the irresistible aroma of food trucks wafting through the air. It was the kind of environment that always lifted my spirits. I was perusing a table of homemade jams when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Rachel, one of the other guests from the infamous lunch, waving at me. Rachel greeted me with a warm smile, and we fell into easy conversation. She was the kind of person who exuded an effortless friendliness, and despite the less-than-stellar circumstances of our last encounter, I was glad to see her. We talked about the market, exchanged tips on the best stalls, and then, inevitably, the lunch came up. I hesitated at first, unsure whether to dive back into the mess of the bill situation, but Rachel beat me to it. "I've been meaning to ask you," she said, lowering her voice slightly as we stood near a table of artisan cheeses. "Did Sarah ever message you about the Venmo thing?" Her question caught me off guard, but I quickly recovered and told her about the $22 Venmo request Sarah had sent me and how she hadn't followed up after I explained my reasoning. Rachel's face immediately twisted into an expression of exasperation, and she let out a sigh. "You're not the only one she sent requests to," she said. "I only owed about $25, and she tried to charge me $40 too." Hearing this was both validating and infuriating. Rachel went on to explain that after the lunch, she'd done the math on her meal and realized she was being asked for way more than her share. Like me, she'd decided to pay only what she owed, but she'd also discovered that Sarah had sent identical $40 requests to everyone at the table, regardless of what they had ordered. Some people, Rachel said, had quietly paid the $40 without questioning it, assuming it was accurate or simply not wanting to stir the pot. Others, like Rachel and myself, had noticed the discrepancy and refused to overpay. Rachel also revealed that she'd spoken to a few other guests from the lunch, and they had all agreed the situation had been handled poorly. Many of them had felt awkward about the way Sarah had taken charge of the bill, but they hadn't wanted to speak up at the time. For some, it wasn't worth the hassle to challenge her, and for others, the social pressure of a large group setting had kept them from questioning the fairness of the even split. The whole thing had left a bad taste in their mouths, figuratively, if not literally. I felt a sense of vindication as Rachel shared this with me. It wasn't just me who had been annoyed or felt taken advantage of. The issue with the bill wasn't an isolated frustration, it was a widespread sentiment among the group. And while I had initially felt guilty for standing my ground, it was clear that fairness mattered to more people than I had realized. Feeling emboldened by Rachel's honesty, I asked if she thought we should confront Sarah directly as a group. Rachel shrugged, her expression a mix of resignation and mild amusement. "I tried," she admitted. She'd reached out to Sarah after the lunch, pointing out the inconsistencies and suggesting a better way to handle group bills in the future. But Sarah had been dismissive, brushing off Rachel's concerns with the same excuse she'd given me, that splitting evenly was the easiest way to handle things. According to Rachel, Sarah didn't seem interested in feedback or fairness, she just wanted to avoid any extra effort, no matter how it affected everyone else. That conversation with Rachel solidified my feelings about the whole ordeal. I wasn't crazy, overly frugal, or unreasonable, I was just standing up for what was fair. While Sarah's approach to handling the bill may not have been outright malicious, it was clear that her choices had caused frustration for more people than just me. And the fact that she had sent blanket $40 requests to everyone, regardless of what they owed, only reinforced my belief that she had acted selfishly and carelessly. In the end, I didn't hear from Sarah again, and I chose not to push the issue further. The group chat from the lunch fizzled out, and I didn't go out of my way to stay in touch with her. I realized that if I ever found myself at another group meal with Sarah in attendance, I'd either make a point to clarify the bill situation beforehand or politely decline the invitation altogether. Some people just aren't worth the stress. But the story doesn't end there. After our chat at the farmer's market, Rachel and I decided to grab coffee at a nearby cafe. What started as a brief catch-up turned into a 2-hour conversation about everything from work to hobbies to the best local spots to eat. It turns out we had a lot in common, and we exchanged numbers before parting ways. Since then, we've stayed in touch and even hung out a few times. What began as an awkward and frustrating group lunch ended up leading to an unexpected new friendship, which felt like the ultimate silver lining. Update 4. A few weeks after the whole drama with the lunch, Rachel suggested we gather at a cafe, but this time without Sarah. We decided to meet at a cozy local spot where everyone could order whatever they liked. Rachel invited only a few people from that unfortunate lunch, those who, like us, were frustrated with how the bill had been handled. When we got together, the atmosphere was completely different. No one felt pressured or uncomfortable. We all ordered what we wanted, knowing that everyone would pay for their own meals. When it was time to settle the bill, the waiter calmly split it into separate checks, and everyone paid their share without any issues. No arguments, no awkwardness, no convenient methods that worked for one person at the expense of others. This meetup was a stark contrast to the tense lunch with Sarah. We laughed a lot, discussed fun topics, and genuinely enjoyed our time together. It was clear that no one missed her presence. Everyone agreed that spending time with a like-minded group like this was much more enjoyable. Afterward, we decided to meet up like this more often, in small groups where everyone was on the same page. It was simpler, fairer, and far more pleasant. That evening, for the first time in a while, I felt that it was possible to simply enjoy being in the company of others without any hidden agendas or unpleasant surprises. And you know what? That's exactly how it should be.